How great would it be if you could memorize foreign language words and expressions quickly and easily without having to waste time with flashcards or endless vocabulary lists? Once upon a time, this might have seemed impossible, but today it's something anyone can do so long as they follow the right strategies. Today, in this video, I'll share these strategies with you so that your vocabulary learning can go from a difficult chore to something you actually look forward to and enjoy. Hi, I'm Luca Lampariello. I'm a language coach who speaks 14 languages, and on this channel, I help people learn foreign languages faster, more efficiently, and in a fun way. Let's get started. Vocabulary memorization is one of the main challenges facing any language learner. No matter if your target language is similar to your mother tongue or quite distant from it, you'll have to figure out how to take tens of thousands of words or expressions and get them into your long-term memory correctly. To be quite honest, most people do not have a lot of luck with this. They stick to old and inefficient memorization techniques they probably learned from high school language class and never learned that there are much better and much less painful ways to get the job done. I'm going to give you an overview of a few strategies that will help you tap into the world of more effective memorization. We'll start with 3 for today. These strategies are: learn vocabulary through repeated exposure to the right content. Use your listening skills to learn and to review, and use new vocabulary for meaningful communication. 1. Learn vocabulary through repeated exposure to the right content. Like most people, I once thought that learning words in a foreign language was all about repetition. To add a word to your vocabulary, I thought you had to write it down and review it countless times over and over and over again until it stuck in my mind. That's how school tells us the process goes, and most people tend to believe it. But lately, I've been focusing on a last common memorization technique, one that does not involve any mindless repetition whatsoever. Instead, the technique revolves around one thing: repeated exposure in context. Those last 2 words, in context, are the most important. Normally, when you review words using vocabulary lists and flashcards, you're getting exposure to those words or expressions out of context. In other words, you're seeing the word itself and not the many situations and sentences in which you would normally see it appear. Reviewing words in context is about always seeing the word in its natural habitat, so to speak. If you see it again and again within the right kinds of content, you'll memorize it automatically without having to resort to vocab lists or flashcards. This is what I do myself and what I recommend to other learners. Seek out content that has 3 characteristics: content that is rich, comprehensible, and compelling. Rich content is content that you partially do not understand. This means that it contains words that you can learn and therefore add to your vocabulary over time. Comprehensible content is content that you mostly do understand. The words you already know will help you figure out the meaning of those rich words you do not know, often without even using a dictionary. And compelling content is content that is interesting and relevant to you. It connects with your interests, hobbies, and passions, and so you can actually feel compelled to learn from it. Once you identify content that contains these 3 characteristics, circle, highlight, or underline any words or phrases from that content that you think you will want to use for the future. Since that content is rich, comprehensible, and compelling, the words within that content will automatically be much easier to memorize simply through seeing them or hearing them in various podcasts, videos, or texts. So that's my lesson for you. If you get massive exposure to good content in your target language, your brain will gradually and automatically build an intricate web of patterns and connections. When you learn new words from that content, they will become a part of that web and will be much more likely to stick in your head. 2. Use your listening skills to learn and review. Consuming content that is interesting, rich, and engaging is a powerful practice, and it's exactly where you should start your effective memorization process. However, it's far from the only thing you can do to make sure vocabulary sticks to your long-term memory. In fact, while you do need to keep consuming new content, it is also important to find creative, efficient, and effortless ways to review the content you have already learned while you're moving on to new content you haven't covered yet. In other words, find the perfect balance between going through new material and learning old material, and you will be able to improve your ability to both learn and memorize. In this regard, a lot of people use flashcards for vocabulary lists. They resort to something called spaced repetition and apps or spaced repetition systems, or SRSs for short. To briefly summarize the concept, spaced repetition is a memorization technique that somewhat resembles how most people use flashcards, but with a twist. Following traditional memorization methods, you might learn a series of words and then decide to write them all down on flashcards. Then you might decide to go through the deck of flashcards from top to bottom each day as a form of review. Spaced repetition changes up this formula by adjusting the intervals over which you review each card. If you test yourself on a word and remember it correctly, you would increase your review interval, allowing more time to pass before you review that card again. By contrast, if you test yourself on a word and cannot remember it, you would decrease the review interval and perhaps review that card sooner than the others in the deck. By allowing yourself more time to possibly forget the words you think you know well, you're actually strengthening your memory of those words. If you can review something just before your brain forgets it, you will increase your ability to actively recall it over the long term. There are entire apps that automate this process for you. Anki is the most popular example, but if you've followed my more recent videos, you know that using Anki is not something I recommend. Instead, I prefer a more manual approach, which simply involves taking content you have already learned and regularly listening to it at random intervals. This engages the core neurological principles behind spaced repetition without forcing you to navigate clunky flashcard software like Anki. Here's how it works. As part of your daily learning time, make sure you do at least these two things. 1. Dedicate one chunk of time to learning a brand new listening or listening and reading content that you've never seen before. And 2. Dedicate another chunk of time to re-listening to content that you've gone through previously. No sitting down, no reading, no writing, just listening. Plain and simple. This allows you to re-listen to the vocabulary in context and also gives you a powerful review activity you can do anywhere you have access to your computer or your phone and possibly a pair of headphones. For example, I like to listen to Hungarian podcasts while going grocery shopping and Greek podcasts while I take my regular walks in a nearby park. It is a useful habit that will give your brain ample opportunity to gain repeated exposure to previously learned words and phrases, just like spaced repetition systems do. The advantage here, though, is that this practice, which I call listening to review, keeps your reviewed language material connected to its natural context. This allows you to use context cues to strengthen your memory of learned words and expressions much more easily. 3. Use new vocabulary for meaningful communication. So, repeated exposure to target language words in context is one of the most powerful ways to build your vocabulary. I still stand by that lesson wholeheartedly, but the truth is that it's only one piece of a much larger puzzle. There are still many other things you can do and should do in order to make words and phrases stick in your mind. This time, my lesson on vocabulary is a little bit more advanced, and it's all about how you can take things to the next level, during and after you've regularly been exposed to new and interesting words. To do that, you need to engage in something I call smart review. At first, my use of the word review here might remind you of the review you did in school, where you would just mindlessly revisit content and topics you had covered earlier in the school year, likely in the very same way you did the first time. But that's just regular run-of-the-mill review, and it's hardly effective. Smart review, by contrast, is much better and a heck of a lot more fun. To review vocabulary in a smart way, you need to make a habit of actively using the words and expressions you learn. So not by rereading them or even repeatedly writing them down, those are passive things, but by using them for meaningful communication. And what do I mean by meaningful communication? I mean using the word, phrase, or expression to communicate with another person, either verbally or in writing. This sounds harder than it actually is. While you might be imagining having to use the word perfectly in a live, dynamic, off-the-cuff conversation, you do not need to set your sights so high, at least at first. Even at the early stages of your learning, you can use learned words for meaningful communication in simple ways. For example, sending a short text message to a native speaker friend that contains a recently learned expression or two. Recording a short voice message about a video or podcast you recently found and using new vocabulary in your short summary of the content. Having a pretend conversation with yourself where you try to verbally summarize some language material you recently covered. All of these are interesting and nuanced ways to make active use of new expressions, and their effectiveness goes far beyond the more common review strategies of rereading and repeatedly rewriting words over and over. And the best part is that they help you engage with native speakers, even as you review. So, there you have it. 3 powerful strategies you can start using today to memorize words and expressions in any language. Let's quickly review these points. 1. Learn vocabulary through repeated exposure to the right content. 2, use your listening skills to learn and to review. And 3, use new vocabulary for meaningful communication. Okay, that's all for this video. If you'd like to learn more about my favorite memorization strategies, including the listen to review and smart review techniques, check out my Become a Master Language Learner courses, where I go into these methods and more in a lot more detail. If you're interested, I've left more information for you in the description box below. Thanks for watching, and as always, happy language learning.